Hello. We're going to move on to handouts 19C and 19D in this video. So we mentioned before that blood cells are made through a process called hematopoiesis. And you can imagine that what triggers hematopoiesis is, of course, hormones, right? I joked that this class can just be called Hormone 101 because everything is controlled and regulated in our body, it seems, by hormones. So Handout 19C and D are going to talk about the hormones involved in hematopoiesis. So if you look at this, first of all, it says hematopoiesis is stimulated by several growth factors. We're going to call them hormones. All right. These growth factors or hormones stimulate the differentiation and proliferation. So the different types of cells and how many we make of our blood cells. So we basically have two major hormones that each trigger two different blood cells. The first one is called erythropolatin. Erythropolatin is going to be the hormone that triggers red blood cell production. All right. Then we have another hormone called thrombopoietin. Thrombopoietin is going to increase the number of thrombocytes or platelets. And then for all those white blood cells, all the eosinophils, basophils, monocytes, T cells, B cells, they are going to be initiated by these proteins called cytokines. Now, cytokines, are they really considered hormones? Some people consider them hormones. Some of them, they consider them as just proteins. So we can consider them and lump them together as hormones if we want. But they are proteins that are going to stimulate white blood cells. All right. So these white blood cells are going to be triggered by cytokines. And that's what these two handouts are going to show us. So let's go to our handout and we will go through the first two first, which is Urethropolatin and Thrombopoitin. So here's my handout. And I'm going to zoom out here a little bit so we can see it better. Let me get this set up so that you can see it. Okay, so handout 19C is blood cell production. And we're going to just cover these pathways one at a time. All right, so I have them differentiated into blue and green to show you the two different hormones. Okay, now let's start with our blue pathway. So with the blue pathway, we're going to make red blood cells. So there's something going on in our body that is causing hypoxia. Remember, hypoxia is a lack of oxygen. So you don't have enough red blood cells to deliver adequate amounts of oxygen to your body. We call that hypoxia. Now, it's actually the kidneys that recognize hypoxia. And so when hypoxia is recognized, the kidney is going to produce and release this hormone called erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is going to be dumped into our bloodstream. It's going to go through the bloodstream to our bone marrow that makes blood cells. And it's going to tell this bone marrow to make erythrocytes, red blood cells. All right, now this is a negative feedback system. Once we have adequate red blood cells, we aren't suffering from hypoxia anymore, and then we'll shut down the production of erythropoietin and slow our red blood cell creation. So when we don't have enough oxygen, we're going to stimulate this hormone erythropoietin that's going to be produced mainly in the kidneys, and that's going to trigger the red blood cells to make the bone marrow to make red blood cells. Now, a very similar thing is going to be happening with platelets. So up here I just say we have a low platelet count. This low platelet count is going to be recognized mainly by the liver, and the liver is going to secrete and produce and secrete a hormone called thrombopoietin. Thrombopoietin is going to travel through the bloodstream, make its way to the bone marrow, and it's going to tell our red bone marrow to make platelets. And these platelets will increase and will raise our platelet count so that we can clot blood. So if you recently had an injury where you had to clot a lot of blood, you may have a low platelet count, and then we need to secrete thrombopoietin from our liver. So if you notice, I have these labels in both places for both organs. It turns out that the kidneys secrete primarily erythropoietin, but they also secrete a little bit of thrombopoietin. The same thing with the liver. It's just switched. The liver makes a lot of thrombopoietin, and it makes a little bit of erythropoietin. So both the kidney and the liver make thrombopoietin and erythropoietin. It's just that the kidney makes more erythropoietin and the liver makes more thrombopoietin. All right. So these are the hormones that are involved in hematopoiesis, creating new blood cells. Now let's look at handout 19D. And I don't want to freak you out with this, and I just kind of show this as an example. You will learn a lot more about cytokines in anatomy and physiology too, but I just want to introduce them to you. Cytokines are signaling proteins that are going to signal the creation and proliferation of white blood cells. So they are communication proteins between all of our different white blood cells. So those 6 white blood cells that I talked about, eosinophils, basophils, and then all of those T cells, cytotoxic T cells, natural killer T cells, helper T cells, memory T cells, suppressor T cells, all of these cells are going to get signals to and from one another through these cytokines. And so you can see how complicated of a process this is. All I really want you to know for this class is that they are proteins. All right. There are a lot of different examples. For example, we have interleukins, we have interferons, growth factors, tumor necrosis factors. All of these things are cytokines, and they're going to be communicating with the immune system back and forth from one type of white blood cell to another. So I'm not going to get into the specifics of this, but I want you to know that cytokines are signaling proteins, and they're going to help white blood cells reproduce and proliferate, to grow and create more of them. So when you get an infection, you're going to have some neutrophils and macrophages that recognize that infection and attack it, but then they're going to send cytokine signals out to alert the rest of the immune system to make more macrophages, to make antibodies, to make other cells that can attack that foreign invader. All right? So that takes care of handouts 19C and D. And so hopefully now you're kind of getting an idea of how blood cells are formed. All right? So I hope you have a good afternoon. All righty. I'll see you later.